Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. The Premier League is launching its own direct-to-consumer streaming channel in Singapore for next season. So what will it look like? And could it be a sign of things to come in the UK? All right, in with me in the studio, we've got Adam Leventhal. We've also got Matt Slater as well. Gents, let's get into this because, look, Matt, the English top flight is going direct to consumers for the first time with their service, Premier League Plus. Now, we'll get into what that could mean for broadcasting later on. But firstly, can you just take us into the deal that's been struck with Singapore?
Well, we don't know all the details. We don't know the numbers, for example. But what we do know is what Richard Masters told us last week, the Premier League CEO. He kind of drops it in. He was speaking at the Financial Times Business of Football conference, which is one of the best football business conferences going. And he's being asked all sorts of questions about the future of the league, Man City, you name it. And he kind of just sort of almost casually announced this. And I was sitting in the audience and I was thinking, well, I've been away at the Winter Olympics. Have I missed this announcement? Just because the way he delivered it, it was very sort of kind of, oh, by the way, we're doing this thing in Singapore. And I was like, have I missed this story? And I couldn't see anything about it. In fact, the only thing I could see was the stories that me and loads of other journalists wrote that it might happen about 6 years ago, which is when the idea was first floated. And then he finally finished talking, and there were some questions from the floor. And the very first question from the floor was from Martin Ziegler at the time to say, that thing you just said in Singapore, is it you? And he basically said it again. So that it was the only piece of news of the day. And here's what we know. So starting from next season, the Premier League, in conjunction, so it's a joint venture with his existing broadcast partner in Singapore called StarHub, 6-year deal, is going to go direct to consumer. So this is the thing that people have been talking about. Many people, many fans, many people that respond to our comments on pods and written pieces really, really seem to have a direct relationship with the Premier League. So that means the Premier League, for the very first time, not going through, though it is a joint venture, these are the bits, these are the details we don't know, is going to be handling churn, pricing, marketing, not through a third party, not through Sky Sports or NBC. The Premier League is doing it. So that's why it's so new, and it is really interesting. Other leagues, other sports have dipped their toe in this water. We're going to get into, I think, some of the examples later on. But for the Premier League to do it is really, really interesting because they are the apex predator. They are doing really, really, really well out of the existing broadcast model, which you've had for a very, very long time, where you have auctions and you basically sell your rights to partners on a kind of territorial basis, and they do all the heavy lifting. They answer the phone when you say, it's not working. They're the ones that kind of make you offers when you say, I'm leaving. They're the ones that market, that spend money, that they have call centres. So the Premier League has basically sat there counting the money for 30-odd years, but now it's going to get into that game. And I think it is really, really interesting. But I know we're going to get into this. It's an experiment. It's an experiment in a small market, very strategically chosen for reasons that I can happily expand on. And we shall see how it goes.
Okay. Adam, we'll talk about this experiment more a little later on, but I want to talk about an experiment you did, actually. Yeah. Way back in November, you released a documentary on illegal streaming in football in particular. Now, I've looked at the comments on that, both on The Athletic and across platforms, and fans were quite heated about it. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that, but also the appetite for fans for this service?
I think there's a huge appetite for a service like this. And we spoke to people within the documentary. We also did a survey within it and then after it as well. And overwhelmingly, people want a place where they can watch all the Premier League games whenever they are, including the 3 p.m. blackout, which I'm sure we'll go into as well. What I found interesting, going back to what Richard Masters was saying, and the position of this link up and this partnership is the fact that it's in Singapore. And actually, I was sat alongside Matt when we were at the Leaders Conference back in October, another sports conference in the UK. And, he said that Singapore office that the Premier League have is principally, not exclusively, to do with piracy. So it isn't surprising to me that they have started this in a country, but also in a region that has been causing them so much grief in terms of piracy. And ultimately, what fans want is the opportunity to pay less for more and for more accessibility. And yeah, look, if it comes down the line for the Premier League to do this in the UK, then they'll be happy. And I think that lots of stakeholders, including the fans, will be watching how this trial goes in Singapore, because it's game changing ultimately.
Yeah, one of the things I found really interesting about that documentary was that, we talk about Singapore, but this is a global thing.
Yeah.
The UK, there are various territories. Was there anywhere else where you saw it that was most prevalent?
It was interesting to see how multi-jurisdictional this is, and you can have a big operation like Stream East, for example, which a lot of people listening will be familiar with. It's a big sort of US based brand, but it is a brand and it is replicated in various different markets and regions. And we looked into one of the cases where they were able to take down a proportion of Stream East via going to Egypt and getting hold of a couple of guys that were running things there. So I think that it's clearly an issue that is felt by not only the Premier League, but La Liga, Ligue 1, all the big leagues, Serie A, and they know ultimately that they can't end it, but they want to disrupt it as much as possible. But also they know, this is a cause and effect situation. The reason why we're getting a direct-to-consumer platform, or they are becoming more prevalent, and obviously we've got this trial in Singapore, is because the leagues need to get a grip on it, because it is a little bit of a runaway train because of piracy. It's not the only issue, but it is a big issue, and it's an issue that they talk about a lot.
Okay. Matt, why do you think the Premier League have been reluctant to go direct to consumer in the past?
I think there are two big reasons and then sort of some smaller reasons. So the two big reasons, I think, one is structural. So if you think about the way the whole football industry is structured, clubs need to know how much money they've got to spend, right? That's what drives player recruitment, the transfer market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the biggest check that they have received has been the central distribution from the Premier League. And they sell their rights on a sort of 3-year basis. They're going slightly longer now. The 3-year basis was very much a kind of competition issue dictated by the European Union. Longer terms in the States, because broadcasters want longer terms, and we're moving to that. So sort of 4 or 5 years now. And we've been doing 6-year deals internationally too. But anyway, the crucial point is the Premier League goes out, sells its rights around the world to NBC, Sky, etc. And the clubs know, the clubs have certainty, and they get a big old check from the Premier League. Off you go. There's your budget. By going direct to consumer on a more kind of monthly, annual, whatever it is basis, you don't know. You could have a good idea. You know the size of the market and you sort of think, well, that's what Sky we're getting. I'm just picking them because that's the obvious one. I kind of know the size of the market. We should be able to replicate that. We might even grow it because we might be able to reduce the price. You never know. People might really might prefer to buy direct from the Premier League. They might think that connection with their club is closer as opposed to a third party, a private company. Who knows, right? These are all the things that we're going to find out. So you have an idea, but you don't have certainty. You don't have that upfront direct payment. So that's one thing, the kind of structural issue. And I think these are things that football, sport, if it goes in this direction, and everyone's been predicting it is going to go in this direction, there's just been massive disagreement about how quickly. How do you bridge that? Do you have to get like a great big bank to almost sort of overwrite that kind of payment you were getting from the broadcaster? Do you have to effectively borrow it to give to the clubs, or do the clubs sort of have to budget in a completely different way? We shall find out. So that's that structural issue. The other one I think is cultural. So the Premier League has been a competition organizer. It's been really good at it. And its sort of commercial role has been this kind of running auctions, stoking interest. Now it's got to be consumer facing. It's got to have a kind of direct interface to you and I. That's just different. One, you've got to load more staff, but you've got to be a slightly different organisation as well. That's why they've been quite happy to let Sky and NBC do that. You guys are good at that. We'll sell it to you. You sell it to them. You're skipping a stage now. So I think those are the two big reasons. Then I would throw things like they've been waiting for the technology to catch up everywhere because they're very worried that, particularly if it's your name's on the product and there's lots of latency. Let's say the TV pictures are 2 minutes behind the radio, or it's buffering all the time. You're picking up the phone and moaning at the Premier League. The Premier League doesn't want that. So there's been a waiting game for the rollout of 5G and good Wi-Fi everywhere to kind of catch up to where we want to. So it's a good product. So I think those are probably the main reasons. Oh, and I suppose I should also add that, like I said, the Premier League has been doing really well out of the old model. So it hasn't needed to do this.
Yeah, Matt, they've basically been kicking the can down the road as much as possible, haven't they? And if we're being candid about it.
Yes. So when Masters made his announcement, I was sort of running around in the back, kind of chatting to people about it. And yeah, we all wrote this. Several of us, all the normal outlets, had a sit down with him in 2020 where he talked about this, because I think they'd just gone to market with some international rights, and apparently this provision was in their contract. In the deal they'd just done with StarHub in Singapore. Yeah, we could do this at some point, probably with you, so we're not going to completely stiff you here, but it was in their thoughts. And I remember he kind of talks about it, and, we would do an experiment. We're not in any rush to do it. It's something we're interested in, la-di-da-di-da. And some of the trade press had actually written about it maybe a year or so before, that it's part of the conversation at some point, because Netflix was just, everyone sort of thinks that Netflix has been around forever. Cast your mind back a bit. This idea of like a streaming platform and having kind of these monthly subscriptions with a Disney Plus, a Paramount, whatever it might be. This was all relatively new back then. And I remember at the time, it took a long time for Netflix to be profitable. They're the gold standard now, but for years and years and years, the story was, when on earth are Netflix going to make some money? Anyway. That was the conversation back then. And I remember him specifically talking about things like, we've got to wait for kind of the technology to catch up for this product to be good. So you're right, they have been kicking the can down the road. I do think that I should probably also mention a few other things that have happened to make this make sense. And they've been preparing the way. They've been rolling the pitch, the Premier League. So there was a big sports business story about a year or so ago that the Premier League took in-house its overseas content production. Now that sounds a bit, what on earth are you talking about? This is Premier League Productions. They had a 20-year deal with IMG, massive sports agency, that basically ran the overseas operation stuff, all that shoulder content, the highlight stuff, what they were selling around the world. So I don't know, Kenya, Tanzania, South America would basically take a package of Premier League stuff that IMG was making for them. And I think they were doing it. Adam, you probably know this better than me. You probably worked for them at some point, haven't you?
Well, I work for them now.
I do now.
Why am I talking to you? So there you go.
I know exactly about this deal. So Premier League Productions basically makes a whole heap of programs, including match day stuff as well, by the way, live match day stuff. And basically it's shipped out globally. And you're looking at Super Sports in Africa, for instance, or Star Sports in India or those parts of Asia. And that is now all going in-house with the Premier League. So IMG are fundamentally what you class as the production company, and that is now going all in-house to the Premier League.
Exactly. So look, and that story, that's kind of, that partnership was part of the Premier League success, right? Because it was a really high polished product that you could almost sort of say off the shelf, here you go, broadcaster in Tanzania or wherever. Here's a really, really fantastic package of stuff. The games, the pre and the post, a nice little kind of documentary for run during the evenings. The lot, right? And it's all going to look good, and our sheen of quality is on this. So the Premier League is taking that in-house, probably hiring a load of people that used to work for IMG and Premier League Productions, and putting it in a sort of state-of-the-art new place in Olympia in West London. So now the Premier League has got into the production business and is now actually getting into the consumer-facing, it's doing the lot. So these things have been happening behind the scenes. It's going to give the Premier League a load more control. And I think at some point it's going to give them, commercial advantage as well.
So the Premier League's current domestic broadcast deal, which runs until 2028, is worth a record £6.7 billion. As previously mentioned, CEO of the Premier League, Richard Masters, was speaking about the deal with Singapore at the recent Financial Times Business of Football Summit. Here's a snippet of what he had to say.
We spent 2 days with the clubs very recently. The first day we spent looking into the future, looking at growth, looking at opportunities, and half of that discussion was about our approach to media rights sales. So we're aligned with the clubs and what we want to do in that respect. And I think the what we're doing with Premier League Plus in Singapore is really about learning as well as building a business. If it goes well, it may be replicatable, but you don't want to predict further than that, I think, at this stage.
Yeah, Adam, we've spoken about kicking the can down the road and waiting for the right technologies to land. I'm thinking about broadcasters like Sky, TNT. I mean, Sky, their model is based on Premier League football fundamentally. What does this mean for their future?
It's interesting because it sort of made me think about when I was at Sky. I was there from 2003 to 2019 before The Athletic. And you would very much know the importance of football to Sky because you would sort of hear the murmurings of all the new rights deals are up for grabs, and then you would, as we've seen, get the news, we've got the deal for the next 4 years, and everyone would just sort of relax a bit and think, right, cool, we're good for the next 4 years. And that's been happening over, a number of years since 1992-93. So I think that there is always uncertainty for whatever broadcaster is involved in the deal with the Premier League. But the fact that we now know that the Premier League is going into a relationship with one of two broadcasters in Singapore and going for a direct-to-consumer model, it will mean that there is a need for a redesign, not only for the Premier League, but also for Sky. And what does that mean? That means that, they are not going to have to pay billions for the rights, but they're also not going to be having the money coming in from customers. So what I think is interesting in terms of a partnership is that will we see that in the UK? Will Sky become a supplier of their services to the Premier League? And you could argue now that is the sort of equitable relationship that they have already, but it becomes more of we've already talked about D2C. Now we might talk, B2B, business to business. That sort of relationship whereby Sky supply the services, there might be a little bit of a recalibration in terms of how much money, obviously, the Premier League can make, also how much Sky would need to make from that relationship. But I suppose, a good example of where it's sort of already happening is the product which Sky already have. And I don't work for Sky anymore. I'm not promoting it. But, Now TV is ultimately the platform that the Premier League would actually like. So it could, to not coin an Alan Partridge phrase, they could just rebadge you fool. So I think that there are a lot of things that Sky are doing at the moment which shows that the relationship with the Premier League, they've probably known that this is coming. And it's about how they can recalibrate both of their business models to work together. But it's a fluid situation because obviously, TNT, we thought were going to be taken over by Netflix.
It's now Paramount.
It's now going to be Paramount. So it is very fluid and, emerging companies, massive organizations can come into the conversation, especially when you have these long rights deals arrangements. So it's very interesting, but obviously Sky watching with interest. But I think behind the scenes, they will be having detailed discussions of, right, how do we survive this? How do we move into a new era and continue that relationship?
Yeah, Matt, Adam makes a really good point because, the Warner Brothers one is really interesting, especially with TNT. It's owned by a much bigger company now, which will be Paramount, which we've seen in the news. But for Sky, football is their thing. I know they have the tennis, I know they have the cricket, but the audiences they're getting for the football, oh my goodness me. I mean, it's incomparable.
The Sky Premier League relationship over the last 30 years has been one of the most successful in sports, entertainment, really, anywhere in the planet. The two have grown hand in hand together. It's been a fantastic relationship for both of them, which is why I don't see it being broken anytime soon. I think Adam phrased it really nicely when he was talking about that kind of that tension that even within Sky, are we going to get the rights? Are we going to get the rights? Oh, yes, we have. Right. So that's the secret. That's the secret sauce the Premier League have perfected. That competitive tension in their in their auctions. And we've seen the big leaps over the years, over the decades, whenever someone's come along, a new entrant has come into the market to challenge Sky. That is when Sky have been forced to dig deep, too deep at times. There's been, there's been pushback. When Santander came along, when BT first went, right, we're going to take you on over home Wi-Fi, and we think over home broadband, and we think football is the battleground. So Sky's been through these wars. Okay, we're now in a kind of sort of peace at the moment. And what's happened? The domestic rights have plateaued. So that is why what the Premier League are doing here is a fantastic hedge. Right? It's a great sort of defensive move as well. It's basically saying to any market, we can create the tension. If there isn't a big battle for, eyeballs in the Nordics or Canada or South America, we'll do it, right? So don't think that you can just sit there on your hands and go, you can have the same as you had last time. Guys, take it or leave it. You know you haven't got a rival here. You know that Apple's not going to arrive. DAZN's not going to do it. It's us, right? No. The Premier League can now say, not only can we make the stuff, we've got our own state-of-the-art studio. We're doing it in Singapore. We've learned a lot over there. If you're not going to enter this auction properly, in good faith, we'll do it. So that, I think, is the really sort of clever bit that no one's really sort of saying out loud yet. But that's what's going on here.
Let's say it does come to the UK in whatever shape or form, Adam. What does this mean for the 3 p.m. blackout here in England in particular? A lot of our American viewers or global listeners might not realise that here in the UK, if there's a match at 3 p.m, we cannot watch it. Yeah. Whereas if we're in the United States, there's a plethora of games all for you to watch. What does that mean for this market in particular?
I think it's essential that we move beyond the 3 p.m. blackout as soon as possible. And I mean, that's my personal opinion, but I think that that's also, judging from what Richard Masters said on stage at the FT, it was almost just a throwaway comment about the 3 p.m. blackout. He basically sort of said, yeah, we're the only ones that can't watch it and everyone else can. I think they know in the piracy debate, that has to change, because people know that there are ways that you can go and watch those 3 p.m s, which are so easy. When we spoke to people, we surveyed them, we spoke to them in interviews as well. 64% said that they wanted the blackout gone. And obviously there is a big debate over whether that then harms attendances at lower league grounds.
Is that realistic in this day and age?
Well,
if Southampton are playing in the Championship, I want to watch Southampton. I don't want to watch Manchester United versus Arsenal if I'm a Southampton fan.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is the argument that in some areas, I don't know, say if Stockport are playing at home and you've got Manchester City, Manchester United, and it's on the telly, then that might actually, lead to people going, "Oh, it's wet and windy out there. It's bound to be. It's up there." I don't want to go to the game. I want to watch it on the telly.
Yeah.
So there is that argument, but I think, and Matt will probably know far more than I do about
He's grinning.
this.
He's got something. I can see him.
That it's.
I'm looking out the window. I'm in Macclesfield. It's glorious.
It's glorious. Well, yeah, of course, but in terms of the money that is made by football clubs at a lower level, it's the solidarity money that's dripping down from the Premier League, which is all part of a debate at the moment, and the regulator's getting involved in that. The regulator will certainly get involved on the 3 p.m. blackout. That those lower league clubs need those solidarity payments rather than maybe a slight decline in attendances, which at the same time, the EFL is saying our attendances are stronger than ever. So the argument for the 3 p.m. blackout doesn't really hang true anymore. It's vital that we move beyond it, I think.
Yeah, Macclesfield in the National League. You're going to not go watch them instead of Man United versus Arsenal on the TV?
Well, sixth tier. So, in my lifetime, let's say in the last 20, 30 years, as Adam points out, attendances are fantastic. They've been on, a steady rise for decades now, since the nadir of the 80s, hooliganism and decrepit stadiums and various tragedies. But since then, English football has an amazing story to tell in terms of attendances. So, I have changed my mind over time on the 3 p.m. Because I support a smaller team, and I know lots of people who sincerely believe this, by the way, people who work at clubs who will say, no, trust me. We can tell you on Champions League evenings in particular. Adam's mentioned some of the potential flashpoints. Clubs that are in the shadow of giants will say, yeah, we can see it. We can see it. 500 fewer people will come in, right? So that's fewer programs, fewer pies, fewer pints. It hurts us. Where I've changed my mind is, well, hold on. We've gone fully professional now in the 5th tier. I go see 6th, 7th, 8th tier games. I'm seeing huge crowds. Where there used to be 30, there's now 300. Where there used to be 300, there's now 1,200. So, and I think it's because we've all become, and I'm looking at my kids here, we love the live experience. We crave the live experience, be it music, so festivals, be it football, be it sport, whatever. Being there is important. And I go back, I think you framed it really nicely. I support Southend United. I don't care if Liverpool are on at 3 p.m.
Yeah, they're your team.
Yeah. And I just think people need to be a bit braver about that. But I understand that this goes right back to when TV first arrived in football. This goes back to the debates of the 60s and 70s and 80s where people really thought, oh my word, the last thing we can do is let the cameras in. No one will come. That's not been true, though, is it?
No. Let's learn more about some other countries across Europe that actually are doing things a little different, especially when it comes to direct to consumer. We need to talk about Ligue 1, Matt, and we've spoken about it on this podcast as well. I mean, they were sort of forced into the sort of direct to consumer based on collapsed broadcast deals with DAZN, etc. Is that an interesting model to look at in terms of how you can take control and potentially make it a success?
Well, yes and no. I mean, obviously you'd look because they are a big league that have gone direct to consumer at home with a Ligue 1 Plus. So there's definitely a kind of people like that plus name.
They've got sorry to interrupt, Matt, but they've clearly been working with the same marketing firm. We've got FIFA's platform, FIFA Plus, Premier League Plus.
Yeah.
Come on,
someone's making a lot of money.
Box.
Some agencies making a lot of money out of it.
Exactly.
Well, I'm not saying Premier League the Masters announcement was rushed out. I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus here. But when he said it, and I started writing my story on my laptop, I immediately thought, well, is it Premier League PLUS word or is it plus? Is it Premier League plus symbol without a space in between or with a space? So I just started WhatsApping Premier League staff and I got different answers. Right? So they even hadn't really worked it out. It is, by the way, symbol with a space in between, which is, I think, I might have this wrong. I think Ligue 1 is with a symbol without a space in between. So I don't know. But anyway,
you digress.
Yeah, not that inventive. Not that inventive. I think F1's is called F1 TV. NFL have got Game Pass, haven't they? So look, there's a few things you could have done. But anyway, they've gone for Premier League Plus. Look, the thing they can learn from Ligue 1, and this is where the Premier League is doing it from a position of strength, right? France had got themselves backed into a corner that had a series of collapse deals that go right back a decade to Media Pro, Amazon there. They didn't collapse. It was more, they all decided they'd bid too much and they just weren't getting the money to justify. They weren't getting the subs to justify the upfront payments they'd made for the rights. And they were constantly kind of trying to chip away at Ligue 1, and there were various court cases going on. It was ludicrously complicated. And they just basically said, we have no choice. So what have they learned? Well, the TV income that the clubs receive has crashed. It is championship levels. I can't remember. I think PSG are going to get about 10 million. PSG don't care because they have enormous commercial revenues and they get loads and loads of money from the FIFA Club World Cup and UEFA. But for everybody else, it's a massive problem. On the flip side, various people predicted it would be another embarrassing failure. Well, it wasn't an embarrassing failure. In fact, the numbers of subscribers have been pretty good. Okay, there's definitely room to grow. The product hasn't fallen over. There were some teething problems. Of course, there'd be teething problems, but by the end of the season, no one was moaning about the service anymore. And like I said, people weren't quitting. The issue that Ligue 1 would have, or any rights holder, any league that chooses to do this, is what you do in the summer. Right, the football finishes. Does everyone just immediately ditch their contracts? How do you stop that churn? And this is why, another reason why the big leagues' rights holders have always been quite happy to sell them to third parties, because Sky will then fill it with cricket and golf, and they'll stop that churn. Movies, whatever, Game of Thrones. They will keep their customers. That's their problem. It's not the Premier League's problem. Ligue 1 have had this issue, and they tried to fill it with quite a clever deal with some World Cup rights. Of course, they then got big-footed by beIN. So, watch this space, how they cope with churn during the summer. But I think the Premier League can learn plenty from Ligue 1's experience. It's quite helpful that someone else has gone first, right? We'll watch their mistakes, watch the things that work. What Ligue 1 need to do is probably raise the price a bit and grow the customer base. They need to get more French people watching Ligue 1.
This is a fascinating one, just in football and the way it's consumed in general, Adam. I'm thinking about younger audiences. Matt talks about, people still wanting that live experience, but we know that younger audiences aren't coming to live matches the same way perhaps their parents were in many respects. Is this necessary, this idea that you can go to streamers, you can also go to YouTubers and people like Mark Goldbridge to try and bolster the product?
Yeah, you have to diversify, don't you? Because, people have different consumer habits now, and you have to ensure that you're part of the conversation. Even if you might have the live rights, you also then need to provide that, shoulder content, as Matt was saying. You look at, I remember being at Sky, and on the walls often you would see it's only live once, and that's their big motto. So you still have an attractiveness for the live action. As Matt was saying, people going to games, but also watching it live. But, the highlights, the clips, the alternate ways to watch. We were talking about Ligue 1 before. I saw a clip, it popped up on LinkedIn. One of the sort of associated parties of Ligue 1 had posted how you can watch the game in more of like a, people in the UK will be familiar with Sky Sports News, the on-screen graphics, but also that the names of the players will pop up in real time. It will bring up data as the game's going on. So people want that sort of stuff now. And there's an expectation, especially with the growth of esports, which is the fastest growing sport in the world, that people have different consumer habits. I mean, you could argue sometimes, and I've had this moment sometimes with my son, you're watching a bit of a drab Premier League game, and at halftime you go, should we have a game of FIFA. Or EA or whatever? And you think, yeah, this is actually more fun. This is actually more fun. So you're competing against that.
Yeah.
And I mean, one example comes to mind that if you're not being talked about, you do disappear. James Horncastle will kill me for saying something like this, but obviously Serie A became so popular in the UK because of Gazzetta Football Italia. James Richardson, who we know very well here, the host of Totally Football. When that disappears and you don't have that additional content, you lose the conversation. And I suppose Serie A will probably say, well, it'd be great to see the data of consumer habits in the UK after Gazzetta went. And, that's what everyone now needs to do. Even if you're just giving away something at times, speculate to accumulate rather than...
What do you mean, for free instead of charging?
Yeah, perhaps? And if it's highlights and if it's clips, at least you're still being talked about. You make your big money from your traditional broadcast deals, and yes, we're discussing that is changing, but give away a little bit and you might get the fans in the future, and that's what they have to that's what they have to look at.
Okay, well, let's speak about the dominance of the Premier League in many respects, because, we've spoken about giving something away in particular, but we're talking about leagues like Germany and France that aren't as big as the Premier League. And look, Premier League TV money is at an all-time high and way above their rivals in European leagues. There are 9 Premier League teams now through to the knockout stages of UEFA's major tournaments this season. When we talk about competitive balance, and I'll come to you first, Matt, and please follow on, Adam. Is this a little worrying for European football?
Yeah. And they've been worried about it for a while. Yeah. Look, again, you mentioned James Horncastle. This is his great big bugbear. We've got to stop talking about the big 5 leagues. It's one league and some big teams. And it's almost got to the point now where we have a big 8, whatever. It's the big 6 plus probably Newcastle and Villa. And even, clubs like Crystal Palace, West Ham, they're not far off if you just look at their kind of turnover. The Premier League's very deep, has a lot of money, because it's got a lot right. Matchday revenues are great. Full stadiums, good stadiums. That's very much Italy's problem. Great commercial revenues, again, because the commercial revenues follow the eyeballs. No league. Even the NFL, which is the gold standard, just because in terms of its utter control, its domination of North America, the world's biggest economy. No one is making as much money from overseas rights as the Premier League. It's an amazing story. So well done them. But yeah, it is a worry. If I was the best, one of the best teams in Portugal, the Netherlands, Italy, France, that isn't PSG, yeah, you're seeing yourself routinely now outbid, outspent by teams that they would have been thinking, what? Bournemouth? Brentford? Sorry, who? What division are they in?
Crystal Palace?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So this has it crept up on us? I mean, it might have crept up on some people, but this has been coming in some ways. It's is it incompetence, bad luck? I don't know. The nature of how intense football is in the Premier League. It's taken a while to get here. People have been waiting for this. The doom-mongers on the continent have been like, oh my God, if we're not careful, the Premier League's just going to their financial advantages. How do we deal with it? Yeah, it's been coming. So yeah, I think it is a concern for UEFA. What UEFA can almost do is, the reason we have these big clubs in other leagues is because they are getting guaranteed almost entry to the Champions League, get almost now guaranteed entry to the FIFA Club World Cup. That is what enables them to go eyeball to eyeball with Man United and Man City and Liverpool. Real and Barca still do really well in the Deloitte lists. It's what happens underneath them. They are moving away from their domestic rivals and making things worse at home and compounding the problems.
In terms of what the other leagues are saying about the Premier League, I find that really interesting. And Matt will have listened as well at that FT conference that we heard Richard Masters at. Javier Tebas, who is not backwards in coming forwards about all sorts of different things. Yeah. It was very entertaining to watch. And I know you were speaking earlier on in the week about financial fair play and new rules, and Chelsea making a massive loss and all that sort of stuff. The financial rules, he believes that the Premier League are pushing away and basically don't care about the rest of them. And he would say that everyone needs to have the same rules. You could argue that UEFA, obviously, their rules for UEFA competitions, then there is some equilibrium there. But then at the same time, each league has its own interests. The Premier League clubs, Richard Masters is only really answerable to the shareholders, and they're the clubs. Those clubs are answerable to their owners, their owners and their hedge funds and things like that. So his job is to make as much money for the Premier League as possible. And for as long as he can do that, he will do it. And it's also interesting from Javier Tebas, he will have beef with Nasser Al-Khelaifi, who's the president of Paris Saint-Germain, but also has a controlling interest on beIN Sports in Qatar as well. So he'll say that there's a conflict of interest there. That's all part of the conversation. But then at the same time, whilst he says, we need equilibrium amongst all the leagues, he's also arguing, well, I want to be able to take La Liga games to the United States to make more money for my league, whereas other leagues will go, well, we're not going to do that. So he sort of wants his cake and eat it, or his paella and to eat that as well, or whatever the saying would be in Spain. But I do just find it really interesting that they're all competition. They're all in business. Each of them wants to be the top dogs, and they're all basically a bit jealous of the Premier League. The interesting thing for me to sort of take it back to the piracy issue and having to sort of recalibrate the finances, and we discussed this in the documentary, if anyone wants to go back and listen to it. It was raised by one of the speakers that we had in there, that there is a shock absorber within the game if you need to recalibrate the finances from replacing broadcast revenue to a fluctuating subscriber model, and it's your wages. So wages can go down. Players don't have to be earning, my son always enjoys telling me how much Cristiano Ronaldo earns, per day, per minute, all this. And it often leads into a conversation about pocket money. But, they can earn less. And what interests me, what Richard Masters said in that speech where we all started on this episode, is that they are having discussions with the clubs. It almost sounds to me that the roadmap is there. We've got our new financial rules in for the Premier League. You're just going to need to cut your cloth accordingly a little bit. There might be a little bit of pain down the road, albeit our overseas rights are growing by 27%, but we're recalibrating. You might need to recalibrate as well. So it's an interesting time.
Adam, appreciate your time. Matt, thanks for joining us. And also thank you guys for joining us as well. We'll catch you soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.